Oh boy, the movie Poop Shoot really gave me a decidedly non-turd movie for this episode of B-Movie Enema. In fact, I think it should have a sizable gold nugget. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, your B-Movie proctologist, and I'm going to go ahead and kick it on over to my trusty assistant, Nurse Disembody, to introduce this week's gem.
This week's episode has us taking a look at 1973's Messiah of Evil. Marianna Hill plays Arletty, who has come to a small coastal town looking for her missing artist father. She meets Playboy Tom and his two traveling girlfriends, Tony and Laura. They soon unravel the moody mystery of this bizarre town and a particular ritual that occurs every 100 years.
Okay, so Messiah of Evil. Now, I love this movie so much. I mean, this is one of the handful of movies that I've watched for B-Movie Enema, the blog, that I consider to be actually very solid, very well-made movies that actually sets out to do a thing and really comes through in spades. But where do I start with this movie? I mean, there's so much that I want to say about it, Nurse Disembody.
I know. You are so excited for this movie.
I know. But so let's start with two elements here. First and foremost, this movie is a bit of a slow burn horror movie. It's not really a movie that jumps out and tries to scare you too often. There's not a great many characters in this movie to interact with either. What it has, though, is an effective mystery and a really great, just heaping mounds of atmosphere. Now, we've got a girl who's searching for a missing father. She's got to go to this remote coastal town, and there's a hidden secret about this town. Everything about this movie feels like you should be watching it in the dark during the fall while you're bundled up in a blanket while the wind blows and howls outside. It's the exact thing that I want in horror. I don't really want gore. I definitely don't want torture. Cheap-ass jump scares and loud music stings are really kind of boring to me after a while. And it's not like all those things can't work, and sometimes they do, but what they are is that they're really fleeting. And what I want is to feel something while I watch it, and then after it's over, I'm still thinking about it or feeling it. I want a movie to be so full of atmosphere and style that when I see another movie with the same style, or if the weather simply looks and feels like what we saw in the movie, I'm immediately reminded by it. Now, I want a movie like this, or Silence of the Lambs, or The Shining, or The Blair Witch Project, to stay with me for days after. Now, I'll be pointing out some specifically great scenes later in this episode, so I'm going to be taking notes, and you better be too. Now, the people who made this movie are husband and wife writing team of Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz. This was right around the start of their career. What they're probably or one thing that they should probably be called out for is that they are unsung heroes to people, let's put it this way, of a certain age. The couple were the script doctors for the original Star Wars movie. And it's been long known that George Lucas's original cut of Star Wars and his original script, on top of that, was interesting but not great. The script was very dry. It had a lot of procedural stuff in it. The editing was very procedural in a lot of ways. It had scenes that went on too long and was a bit of a mess. But two things happened to save the movie. First, Huyck and Katz came along and injected a lot of the more fun and comedic elements to the script to help kind of punch it up and lighten the mood of the movie. The other element was a save from editors Paul Hirsch, Richard Chew, and Lucas's own wife, Marcia, who worked in their own spare time while they were editing another film to help with the timing, the pace, and the excitement of Star Wars. Now, I'm going to go a bit off the rails here for just a moment. Now, the original Star Wars stuff that ultimately had to get doctored and everything, was basically what we got in the prequels.
I can feel you want to take this further, but let's get back to Messiah of Evil.
Thanks, Nurse. I agree. Of course, you're right. I mean, there's no need to go down those crappy avenues when we're about to watch Messiah of Evil. Hike was a big fan of the Universal horror classics and was also an avid reader of Lovecraft in his youth. The moodiness and the otherworldliness of this movie really tips its hat to those two influences. Also, being somewhat fresh from film school, they were also bringing in very European ideas. Katz is quoted as to saying that she liked the idea of using the setting of this portion of Los Angeles where they shot to look something like what Antonioni would make a setting look, or how it would make it a character. She also mentioned how the French really loved narration and was greatly influenced by that as well. So a lot of these things make for a wonderful little horror movie that we are going to watch right now. So let's get started on Messiah of Evil, and we'll see you here after the first segment. All right, so we're off and running. Now let's get back to the very beginning of this film. What did you think of that music choice there at the beginning of the movie, Nurse?
I didn't quite expect that music choice for that song.
You really didn't expect a song about like holding on to love or whatever to start this horror movie, huh?
I totally added it to my iPod.
Wait, you still have one of those? Anyway, the opening prologue has only a slight connection to the first real scene of this movie after the credits. It's almost there more to say that you can't really trust anything that you see or are around in this area of California. Now, the guy who was the victim at the beginning was a young Walter Hill. Now, Hill directed The Warriors and Streets of Fire. He produced the Alien movies, so he's a pretty big deal. He was friends of Hike and Katz's, so they needed somebody to kind of be in this opening of this film, and they just asked him to be in that scene, and he agreed. Now, after that, we do have that great little tense scene at the gas station with the albino trucker, who's played by Benny Robinson. And this is the only movie that Robinson ever made, but he's an imposing threat in these early stages and then in a scene later on. We do see Walter Hill's body in the back of the truck, and the gas station attendant, after trying to stop the lady from going to Point Dune, California, by saying, "Oh, that's a dead town. Nothing happens over there." He eventually has to basically snap at her to get lost. He ultimately is killed by mysterious figures. So obviously something bad is going on. Now, the woman who stopped off for some gas is Mariana Hill, and she is playing Arletty in this movie. It's her father who's gone missing. Now, Hill had a pretty great career. She got her start in the early 60s when she was about 17 or 18. She had roles on episodes of Perry Mason, The Untouchables, Batman, I Spy, Wild Wild West. But I know her best from a particularly great first season episode of Star Trek called Dagger of the Mind. Now, she played Dr. Helen Noel, who, when she's testing out this psychological tool that she and Captain Kirk are kind of thinking is being turned into a weapon, she tests out the machine by implanting a fake memory of her and Kirk hooking up at the Christmas party. And that has some pretty lasting effects on him. Naughty, naughty. Anyway, she would end up in a handful of notable movies. Movies like High Plains Drifter with Clint Eastwood, The Godfather Part 2, made by some hack named Crapola, something, I don't know. Anyway, she was in Blood Beach later on, and Schizoid, both of those in 1980. She is also in one movie that I will never ever watch again. She was in the movie called The Baby. And that's about a man who is developmentally stunted by a cruel mother and a set of sisters and is stuck in the perpetual state of being an actual baby. He's physically grown, but he's mentally an infant. He poops himself, he slobbers all over the place and acts like a baby. Now, Nurse, I do know that that is a particular fetish of yours, but to me, it makes me physically ill. That's just something that I just cannot watch in that movie.
So no diaper play tonight, my big baby boy?
Ew, no. So in this first section, we get to see Arletty trying to interact with some of the folks in Point Dune. And there's this weird blind, deaf, and mute old woman who touches Arletty's face, the snooty man who she asks if he's seen her father, and the town drunk Elisha Cook Jr. Now, Cook was also in a great first season episode of Star Trek called Court Martial, where Kirk is brought up on charges of wrongfully sacrificing an officer. He was in about 1 billion movies like The Maltese Falcon, Kubrick's The Killing, House on Haunted Hill, Rosemary's Baby, Salem's Lot. He's pretty spectacular playing the town drunk. He's first seen telling oddball stories to a trio of travelers. Now, the first thing we hear is how he was brought into this world by seemingly, I guess, uncaring parents. And he also first mentions the blood moon and the night that his daddy lost religion and discovered that men could do terrible, terrible things. Now, he's telling these stories to a trio of others who are passing through Point Dune, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in the next segment of Messiah of Evil. Alright, so we met 3 new characters at the end of the first act, where that ultimately ends up kind of playing a big part in this movie in various ways. The first is Tom, and he likes to collect things, as one of his girlfriends say. He's played by Michael Greer. Now, Greer's actually a trailblazer for how homosexuals would be portrayed in as respectful ways as possible, at least in the late 60s and early 70s. His breakthrough role came in the movie The Gay Deceivers, playing a flamboyantly gay landlord of a building that the 2 main characters are faking their own homosexuality to live in and dodge the draft. It's said that he actually rewrote the script where he could, as to not have his character come off as too much of a joke or a cartoonish type of gay character. Unfortunately, he didn't really realize that when he played that role so well, then followed it up as a transvestite gay man in the prison film Fortune in Men's Eyes, he would be typecast essentially forever. Now, from what I understand, Greer was gay, but rarely could get any real mainstream straight roles. He did do some smaller B-movies like this one, where he does seemingly play the romantic lead and the hero of the movie. And he also was in the Roger Corman-produced Summer School Teachers. But he was really better known for being a stage actor and a comedian. Tom, though, doesn't travel alone. With him are 2 babes. The first is the not-so-worldly Tony, played by Joy Bang. Now, Bang was born in the Midwest and was raised by adoptive parents in New York. In the late 60s or so, she was a go-go dancer and was a frequent collaborator of an underground filmmaker by the name of Andrew Meyer. Now, Meyer was from Boston, but ultimately she really only starred in 8 films, with this being the final big screen role for Bang. And probably her most recognizable role was in Woody Allen's Play It Again, Sam. And one of the things that I really like about her is that when you first see her, she just comes barreling into a room, kind of teasingly, not exactly overly dressed. And she just seems ditzy, but not ditzy in a bimbo sort of way, but ditzy in a way that she's just not very experienced. She's young. It's clear that she's meant to be very young. Now, Tom's other traveler is the uppity model and art critic Laura. Now, Laura is played by the spectacular Anitra Ford, and she was one of Barker's beauties on The Price is Right, while starring in movies like The Big Birdcage, Stacy, and The Longest Yard. Her most famous role, though, is probably as Dr. Susan Harris, the queen of the other sex-starved women in Invasion of the Bee Girls. And that's a movie that has a surprising number of fans. It's 100% a sexploitation science fiction horror film, but it also kind of throws back to a time in which sci-fi films could have these really insane over-the-top ideas and bring people into the drive-in to watch them. Now, it is also stated that in an episode of Siskel and Ebert, back, I think in the late 70s or early 80s, Roger Ebert named this as one of his top guilty pleasure movies, Invasion of the B-Girls. So, much to probably Siskel's chagrin. But, the movie is actually pretty well remembered for being exactly what it is. It has zero qualms about what it wants to be. Now, Tom is supposedly a collector of legends. He's appreciative of towns and their strange stories. Of course, we saw how he witnessed some strange goings-on back on the beach when he went for a walk. Now, he was paying the town drunk to learn more about the town's oddness, but he was also knowledgeable of Arletty's father and that he has disappeared. Of course, he also wants to collect Arletty. And as we saw, this really pisses Laura off something awful, and this leads to a marvelous sequence for her, albeit it is also her demise. First, she tells Tony that she's going to beat Cheeks and get out of town, and that she's done with Tom, which Tony doesn't really either seem to care or understand. But then she gets a ride from our albino trucker, who then offers Laura a mouse to eat. Then she goes to the supermarket where she has an unfortunate run-in with the townsfolk who are just looking for something to eat themselves. And this is where we get to the building dread of this bizarre town that is pretty much completely empty and totally cold. The gas station guy at the beginning told Arletty that that place was dead. Well, now we're seeing it. As it approaches the 100-year blood moon, things are dying. The townspeople are becoming cannibals and almost zombie-like in the way that they seem to have no will, thoughts, or personality except to consume and usher in the return of this dark stranger that holds this town under his satanic control. Now, for Laura to die by way of being consumed by the locals in a ritualistic feast in a supermarket where you go to consume sometimes mindlessly and ritualistically in a haze of capitalist behavior probably doesn't really have any symbolism whatsoever. And then we have Tony's final scene, and she goes to the movie theater to watch a movie called Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, as if the movie is telling her character to do just that. Again, the eeriness of an empty movie theater with hardly anyone in it that slowly fills in behind Tony until she's bum rushed and devoured is, maybe even more so than Laura's death scene. Tony being surrounded by members of the town while she's almost blissfully watching the screen, almost as if she's just kind of being lulled into a sense that she's someplace safe, someplace normal. And then she finally realizes that there's something really bizarre going on behind her, is probably more of a true horror scene than the supermarket attack. That was vicious, yes. This was something that took its time and slowly proved to be a terrifying situation. So while Laura was being consumed in a consumer market, Tony is being kept pacified by a movie while the horror starts encroaching in on her from an older population. Again, maybe there's a bigger meaning here. Maybe it's just an awesomely terrifying scene. Now, Nurse Disembodied, I was kind of thinking about this. When we had our interview, I never really asked you if you were by chance some sort of invading B-girl or something, and maybe if I should be kind of concerned for my life or anything. So, are you? Are you a B-girl?
Buzz, buzz, buzz.
All right, well, let's get back to the conclusion of The Amazing Messiah of Evil, and I'll see you here when the movie is over. All right, so that's the end of Messiah of Evil. Arletty has been consumed, but in a different way, by Point Dune. Now, she's now sent to be the messenger of the Messiah of Evil, and while she is spreading the word as the townspeople wanted, she's also terrified and scared of the day that the Dark Stranger and his followers will return for her. Now, a couple of last bits here from the movie before we start to wind this whole thing down. First, the scene in which Arletty's father, Joseph, visits her, that's an incredibly intense scene. He's crazed. He's hungry. He's fighting a losing battle to not succumb to his own hunger. Although I suppose this is more of a vampiric sort of deal and not cannibals or zombies, though obviously there's a little bit of both of those things going on as well. Now, anyway, when he visits Arletty, he eventually ends up with blue paint covering his face and is ultimately lit on fire by her. But just before being lit on fire, as he's covered in paint, that image became something used in the openings of one of the years of Cinemasker's Monster Madness series that James Rolfe did. And it's a good moment that we've been kind of building to for the entire 70 minutes prior. She came to town looking for her father. She found him, and it wasn't good. I also like that it did call back to the Elisha Cook characters, basically saying that you can't shoot these creatures. You can't, you have to burn them. You have to, there's nothing that's ever going to change these people back to what they were either. She's going to have to kill her father, and she was going to have to burn him, and that's what she got, and that's what she did. Now, when we finally get the full story of the Dark Stranger, it's totally worth it. Too often modern horror movies will try to explain the evil to, I don't know, like ground it in reality or something, but here, it just puts things into better context. Why the Dark Stranger came, why is he returning, what's going on with the town, and so forth. It's well written and well conceived. It also fits the era, too. The early 70s was a very tumultuous time, and the Dark Stranger was really just kind of feeding off that despair and tumult. Now, Arletty's father, Joseph, is played by longtime character actor Royal Dano. And to be honest with you, I did check to make sure that Royal Dano also wasn't in a first season episode of Star Trek, but alas, he wasn't. Dano racked up nearly 200 credits in his career that spanned from 1949 until 1993. Gosh, this is a great film. I mean, this is one that I watch every 6 months or so. It's one that I wouldn't just recommend to anyone. It's only for those who appreciate the slow burn sort of horror, as opposed to those cheaper jump scare-like thrills. It's not just creepy from the standpoint of the atmosphere or general mood set by this empty town and the howling winds from the ocean in Arletty's father's house. It's got character to it, and the characters have an opportunity to breathe and actually have some things to do. This movie is just criminally underrated. All right, nerds, tell them where they can find our stuff.
You can find all of Jeff's writings and upcoming episodes at www.bmovieenema.com. You can follow the page at Facebook and Twitter and check out episodes on YouTube. If you have a Roku, get OtherWorlds TV and check him out along with all the other hosts that appear there on weekends.
All right, so I guess that does it for this week's B-Movie Enema. We're more or less now in the home stretch of this first season, so I hope you stick it out with us. Hey, nerds, what smells so good?
I'm reheating leftovers.
Oh, what'd you bring?
I've got some tom ribs with a rack of Lori and some Tony slaw.